I think today's topic should be about the sad news that the Queen has passed away. I'm sure all of you listening to this podcast have probably heard this news by now because it seems to be big news, not only in the UK, but also everywhere around the whole world. In fact, I've been very surprised by just how big this news has been globally and also in the UK. Obviously, the death of anyone is a sad thing. And when someone well-known, perhaps someone famous, dies, it is usually covered in the news. But not like this has been. This has had, and still is getting, some very serious coverage. I remember the day after the event, looking at the BBC News website, and almost the entire page was just full of articles related to the death of the Queen, apart from a very small row of news, like about 4 or 5 news articles under the title Other News. It's just the entire page was just full of about 20 or 30 articles about the passing of the Queen. It really is such a big piece of news over here, and every time you turn on the television, every time you're turning on the television to look at the news, you're pretty much guaranteed to be watching news about this sad event and also the events surrounding it, such as Charles becoming King Charles III, and of course the funeral arrangements. I don't think anyone was particularly surprised by this news. The Queen was 96, and I think the last time I saw her was when a picture of her was when she was meeting the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, and she looked a little frail, a little weak at that point. But I think it was only 2 days afterwards that she passed away. So in some sense, it was a bit of a surprise, I suppose. When I first heard of the news, I did feel a little sad despite not knowing the Queen or having ever met the Queen. But I suppose there is that feeling, that sense that she had always been there, sort of as the head representative of the UK, really. And that's been the case ever since I've been born, so for my whole life. And it does feel in a way like the end of something that has been very stable and unchanging for such a long time, and now it's finally changed. As I said, there's been a lot of coverage on the television about this news, as well as some sort of like documentaries providing details about the Queen's life. And I watched 1 or 2 of them. And it was interesting to see all the work that the Queen had done in representing the UK, all of the visiting different countries and different locations for the purposes of relations, ensuring that the UK has good relations with various countries around the world. And that is a very important job, I think. And I couldn't help but be impressed by all the work that she had done. I wouldn't say that I was royalist. So a royalist is someone who is really supportive of the royal family. On the other hand, I certainly don't dislike the royal family, and I'm glad that we have a royal family. But I get the impression that a lot of people who aren't royalists but don't dislike the royal family were quite surprised by how they've been touched by this sad news. According to the things that I've heard people saying when they've been interviewed on news programs, I think even if you're someone who's not that interested in the royal family or what they do, it's sort of hard to ignore what has happened because it is such big news. So, for example, there's a podcast I often listen to, usually daily, apart from the weekends, called Newscast, which is a BBC podcast about news-related topics. The entire podcast for the last 5 episodes has just been covering news about the passing of the Queen, and the entire, the program's logo, the podcast logo, has been replaced by a picture of the Queen. And I've never really seen anything quite like this before. Any news with this sort of scale, this size. And perhaps I won't again in my lifetime. On the following Monday, it will be the Queen's funeral, and this has now been turned into a bank holiday, which is it's typically, I don't know if it still is, but it used to be when all the banks closed down. And because the banks had closed down, it was difficult for businesses to continue to do business. So a bank holiday usually meant that many people were off work. They didn't have to go to work on that day. I don't know if this is still the case. I'm pretty sure actually that all of the banks are open on bank holidays. So it's just sort of tradition that we still call them bank holidays. But yes, my company will be joining in with this bank holiday so that we can have a day away from work and pay our respects to the Queen. Though I'm pretty sure not all jobs, not all companies will be doing this, and usually retail companies like supermarkets or clothes stores, they don't give time off on bank holidays. But as this is such a different, unusual occasion, like a unique occasion, I think they might at least a couple of hours or a few hours from what I've heard. I was actually due to go to London this Wednesday for an appointment. I shan't say what for, because that is a topic for my private podcast. For any of you who happen to subscribe to that, you'll know what I'm talking about. But something weird happened, and it turns out I don't have to go to London today, after all. But had I gone to London, it would have been very, very busy today. There are crowds of people everywhere, and I should imagine I might have had a bit of trouble travelling on the tube around London. So perhaps I would have had to leave the house even earlier to ensure that I arrived at my appointment on time. So on one hand, I'm sort of glad that I don't have to go to London anymore, but at the same time, it would have also been interesting to have seen these huge crowds, or to have been part of these huge crowds, I think. It has been a couple of years, perhaps 3 years even, since I last went to London. Not a place I generally have reason to go to very often, but I'll be going again soon, probably within 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks maybe. I'm not sure. I'm going to wait for an appointment to be given to me, and then I'll have to go down to London on a particular day at a particular time, but I don't get to choose that day or time. It's just given to me. I have to turn up. But I suppose when I next go to London, I suppose it will feel a little different. There is this sort of like a feeling that you're visiting the home of the Queen, even though I think it's only Buckingham Palace that's there. I think I've always sort of had that feeling when visiting London. Anyway, that's the end of this podcast for today. I'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.